What is the worst squat cue you have ever heard? Oh boy. What's up, guys? It is Dr. Seth, and we are back with another round answering your questions from my Instagram AMA. And as always, these videos are sponsored by my own coaching and consultation services. So if you have something you're stuck with and need help, hit those links below and we will be able to get you sorted. Anyways, back to shitty squat cues. What is going to make a cue bad is whether or not it is appropriate to the person the cue is being given to and whether or not the person being cued understands what the cue actually means. So it's easy to want to say something like, oh, chest up is a terrible cue for most squatters because most squatters, when they hear chest up, they're going to end up overarched. You could easily say that like sit back is a terrible cue for most raw squatters because most raw squatters need to do a better job of sitting into their quads. But if someone does need to reach further back, if someone does need to pull their chest up, those cues could be very, very, very appropriate. And telling them to sit into their quads or telling them to pull their ribs down might screw their position even more. And like this week, I was shouting chest up to a dude in the gym because he needs to not look like this when he squats. He needs to, get a bit of thoracic extension, then be able to use his abs to brace. If he were to just, pull down, pull down, pull down, he'd end up, looking like he was trying to do the Marilyn Manson rumors that everyone heard in middle school about him removing his ribs to perform a certain act. Back on topic. I don't think there's like one single cue that could never work in any certain circumstance. It's more just about applying a cue that works for the lifter and that the lifter understands that helps them achieve a better position during the lift. And now to immediately contradict myself, push the knees hard forward into wraps or sit back into them. So caveat here is that if we're squatting in knee wraps, we need to be pushing ourselves into the wraps in order to get pounds out of the wraps. And if we are sitting back, we are getting less knee flexion, which means that we are going to be getting less resistance from the wraps, which means that we're going to be getting less rebound out of the wraps. So the vast majority of the time, we do not want to be trying to sit back in knee wraps because if we're sitting back in knee wraps, we're avoiding the wraps, we're avoiding the wrap tension. We're not going to get that pop out of the bottom. But again, there's no bad cues. There's just bad cues for certain lifters. If you are someone in knee wraps who's pushing so far into the knee wraps that you're just going knee forward, 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 and then can never get to depth because your knees are so far forward, then we might need to work on sitting back a little bit so that we can actually get to depth. So with knee wraps, I want lifters to push forward as far as they can while still being able to get the hips below the knee, because that's going to give us the most out of the wraps and allow us to actually hit depth and get white lights in a powerlifting meet. What would be a good percent for a weight cut for a meet? 0. 0 is the best percentage to cut for a meet because the goal of powerlifting is to be strong. And a lot of lifters want to think like, oh, if I cut weight, I'll be in a lighter weight class and I will be more competitive. But you know what makes you more competitive? Being stronger. And at the top level, yes, cutting weight can give you an advantage, but at the top level, the lifters are already strong. And if you are someone who does not have a dot score of pulling an arbitrary number out of my ass, probably around 500, you have no business thinking about cutting. Now, once you get around and above that 500 dot score range, you're kind of getting towards the actually like competitive at big meets level. And then cutting can kind of start to give you some degree of an advantage. And if you are someone who is shooting for big things at a big level and you're actually close enough to be thinking about big things at a big level, so like you actually have hit a 500 Wilks score, 500 dot score, you're not just someone who wants to compete at a big level with a 375 dots and is, just looking way into the future. If you have 500 dots, you're thinking about trying to do something big at a big meet, then we could maybe consider cutting weight because everyone always wants to say, like, don't cut weight until you're ready to break an all-time world record. The problem with that statement is that cutting weight can help you break an all-time world record if you are right next to it, but cutting weight is a skill that needs to be developed, and it's very, very, very difficult. And if the first time you ever cut weight is when an all-time world record is on the line, it might not be the smoothest experience to figure out. So like if you have that weight cut figured out in your back pocket already before you're at that point where all-time world record is on the line, you are going to have a better shot at it. But that does not apply to 99.9% of the people watching this video because 99.9% of the people watching this video aren't trying to break all-time world records. If you are sick, then, learn to cut so that you can set yourself up for that. But with that said, being strong is going to help you no matter what. And if you are intermediate, if you are even early advanced, especially if you are a beginner, don't worry about cutting. Just worry about, eating food and being hydrated and being ready to go on the day at whatever body weight you weigh in at. And that will give you the best outcome. Your thoughts on SBD variations with band resistance for raw lifters. Bands are sick. I like bands. I think bands have a lot of utility for raw lifters. Chains too, if they are put on the bar for the right reasons. Now, the wrong reason to put bands or chain on the bar is if you're thinking that overload is going to do anything magical for you. Now, yes, bands and chains do increase loading as the bar gets lifted further from the ground, but I'm not putting them on the bar for overload. If I'm putting bands or chains on the bar, it is because I am trying to help out a lifter who has a strength deficiency at the top end of their range of motion, or if they're a lifter who tends to kind of get sloppy in the groove and then kind of get stuck at top end, even if it isn't strength, having weight ramp up that forces them to hold position or forces them to fight through and really be able to challenge that top end range with top end weights without needing real top end weights in the bar, that can be very, very, very beneficial for someone who has a true sticking point at the top, or for someone who has difficulty stabilizing a squat at top end loads. Like if they have difficulty stabilizing a squat at top end loads, they need to get better at stabilizing a squat at top end loads. Squatting with bands, squatting with chains can be very beneficial because it's going to let them get more of those top end load reps in without actually needing to touch those top end loads in real plate weight. So, I mean, I'm kind of talking in circles right now, so I should slow down, but they can work if we're putting them on the bar for the right reason. The right reason is not just to overload for the sake of overload. If there's someone who can be benefited from overloading that top end range of motion, sure, but that is not everyone. And most lifters, they go to shit because they suck in the bottom end, and just putting chains on top of a squat or deadlift or bench that sucks in the bottom end isn't going to help the top end get better. Now, when it comes to bands versus chains, I think that chains work better for lifters who are snappier and more explosive, because the chains kind of like really like it feels like you're squatting, benching, pulling through molasses. Whereas I think that bands work better for lifters who are more slow because it really forces them to speed through it. So bands versus chains, they both work, but if someone is a faster lifter, I'm more likely to put chains on the bar for their heavy work. If someone is a slower lifter, I'm more likely to want to put bands on the bar for their heavy work. Thoughts on doing a fatigued single? I see everybody doing those. Well, I try not to think about what I see the human centipede of powerlifting coaching doing. And I mean, like, they're a trend. They're nothing new. They're nothing all that groundbreaking. Like 10 years ago, when 531 was all the rage, Joker sets after your 531 sets were all the rage along with that. And that was just working up on a single after you did your 531 sets. And in conjugate, it's pretty common to work up for single after dynamic effort work if you are someone who can handle two singles every week. And like with the fatigue sets, like I don't think that it's going to be groundbreaking for someone to just do singles after the volume. But if there's someone who needs more single practice, sure, it can have merit. But with my biases, with my conjugate type worldview, I'd rather have them do a heavy single and then either do a down set or do a secondary exercise that then targets what we learned to that single. But that's just my biases, and there is, excuse me, root beer, more than one way to skin a cat. And I am overthinking the shit out of this question. How did you manage your training when you were doing your doctorate from a DPT student? And I think the reason why I'm overthinking it is because I'm trying to like have this big, fancy, profound answer when reality was that for myself, I never had to think about managing training while in school. I never had to struggle with managing training while in school. And that just comes back to me placing training very high on my priority list. So I made sure that I always had time to train, and I made sure that everything that I needed to train, from food to hydration to sleep, was always done at a level high enough so that I could train at the level that I wanted to train. And while you're in school, I think the biggest thing is, number one, being self-aware and being honest with yourself about what your priorities are. And if training is a high priority, find a way to allow yourself to prioritize it. And number two is being efficient with your time management. Because in school, like obviously you have the classroom demands, you have studying, you have homework. And where I saw a lot of my classmates going wrong with that is that when they should have been paying attention in class, they would be fucking off, so that when they had to study, they had to relearn the material that they should have just learned the first time. And then when they were studying, they were just faffing around, socializing in the library rather than actually just, doing whatever the hell they needed to do to study and remember the information. And when it came time to doing homework, they would just, again, like, I don't know what the hell they were doing, but they were wasting time when they should have just been doing the assignments. And if you can just be more efficient with your schoolwork, you will be amazed at how much time you can bring back so that you can get time back for training and for other things. And number three comes back to training being priority. A lot of my classmates that struggled with finding time for training and struggled with training well were busy partying, busy doing whatever, busy doing yada, 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 busy having a social life. And like, I'm not saying having a social life is bad, but the biggest thing that I sacrificed in school was doing all sorts of like the fun school shit because I knew that I wanted to train. I knew that training was important for me, and I'd rather trade that off than trade off training. So priorities, time management, and priorities, again, are going to be like the three big things that you need to have if you want to make training work while in school. And I would highly advise that if you really do care about training, get your ducks in a row now, because in the real world, when you're doing this for a profession, there is going to be a lot more stress and a lot more stuff on your table than there will be while you're in the classroom. So get it together now so that you have a chance of doing it afterwards, because I think the saddest thing that I've seen after graduation is how many of my classmates cared about training and did well within school and then had it fall off afterwards. So get it together now, because you at least have a chance at doing it when you actually get to do it after grad. And then I think on the other side of that, if training isn't super high on your priority list, just be okay with it, and be okay that when you're in school, when you're out of school and in a real life, you will be busy. And if training isn't up here on your priority list, the things that are up here on your priority list, they're going to go ahead of training. And if that is your priority list, and if that is what you care about, it's going to be okay to let training slip. So don't take this as a you have to do whatever it takes to train. That was me because I cared about training. You're you. So again, priorities, prioritize what you care about, and whatever that is, do your thing. That's what's going to make you happy, right? Okay, glad that's over with. Tips for improving your ability to arch on bench. So places where bench arching is inhibited is going to be like thoracic extension, ability to extend and arch the rib cage, and then hip extension, ability to extend hips to kind of get us around so that we can then have a platform to arch rib cage off of. So basically, spend time in thoracic extension, spend time in hip extension, like hang out in some couch stretches, do some ATG split squats, open those hips up, do pullovers with thoracic extension, do kettlebell windmills to get that rib cage moving in a rotational plane with extension. Like, do shit that's going to help move the rib cage, do shit that's going to help move the hips. You're going to be able to create more space. Now, the thing is that, like, if a rib cage is really bound up, it is going to take a lot of time and a lot of work to get it less bound up. And like, I've been trying to get more bench arch for like literally years, and I've probably like squeaked out like that much, but that is range that I wouldn't have had before, and I'm at least glad that I have done it. Piriformis syndrome and sciatica during deadlifts, please. Well, first off, it is getting really hot in this office because that studio light, so this is probably going to be the last question of the day. Second off, okay, so your hip is pissed off during deadlifts, you're getting neurological symptoms going down the leg. And if that is happening, or like if any sort of pain is happening on any lift, the first thing we want to do is think about load management. That is, that if we are doing more than the body is prepared to handle on a day, the body is going to be like, yo, we're doing more than we're prepared to handle on this day, and it's going to go ouchie, ouchie, boo-boo, because the body doesn't want to do more than it is prepared to handle. And if we want to fix that problem, we can kind of go about this in a couple ways. Number one is we can reduce the amount that we are doing so that we can handle it and then build back up. Number two is we can get shit in shape so that it can handle more. And I usually like to kind of go about this simultaneously so they meet in the middle in this wonderful conglomeration of awesomeness in feeling better. And with pissed off hip during deadlifts, I'm going to want to think like, is it a range of motion intolerance? So no matter what weight on the bar is getting in the positions required to deadlift, does that suck? Or does it not suck until we get to a certain weight? Because how we go about it will kind of change if it is more position focused or if it is more load focused. If it's more position, I'm going to want to be thinking about building up tolerance to the ranges of motion necessary. And I'm probably going to want to expose like the range components necessary to get in the bottom of the deadlift. So I'm probably going to want to expose some hip flexion just in isolation. I'm probably going to want to expose some hip internal rotation in isolation and just kind of see like, does that help us get ground? If it does stick, we will progress that way and build it up. On the load side of things, it might be as simple as just pulling weight off the deadlift bar and building up over time. We could also look at doing movements that kind of break up and segment the demands on the hips during a deadlift. We could be thinking about like, okay, can we handle a single leg glute bridge? Can we handle a single leg RDL? Can we handle a step up? Can we handle a split squat? And if any of those are harder than they should be, they might be really good levers to pull to help us build towards putting more weight on the deadlift bar. But bottom line is, no matter what the injury we have, we need to find something that we can start with, something that we can progress, and then just progress it back towards what we want to do on the platform, and shit is going to work. And holy guacamole, I am getting sweaty. So that is it for today's AMA. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Thank you guys so much for watching. And if you need more help, hit those links below, book a consult, apply for coaching. We will get your shit sorted. Excuse me. I gotta stop drinking root beer between questions.